Today I want to talk about the glory of God. But first I want to say how much we humans love glory. Oh, we just love winning, from any little card game, school sports, Olympics, poker, championship, you name it. We always just love to celebrate a winner. We want to be the winner. We want to be celebrated. We revel in glory. It is just so nice to be rich and to be famous and to be someone who's celebrated and out there in the bright flashing lights, big mansion, driving a car. Everyone worships us, wants to be with us, wants to know us, wants to celebrate us, wants a piece of us. It's just so funny when you see people on something like Come Dine With Me UK where they say, I'm going to win this competition. I'm the greatest cook. I am fantastic. Everyone, they're all like that. And then they cook mediocre to badly. And they still say, yes, out of 10, I'm going to score. I would score myself 10, but I think they would probably score me 9. And yet they get scored 6 or something. And they just cannot. They're blind to the fact of how unglorious, how bad they are. And you see this, I watch some really bad TV, First Dates Australia. These people just think they're magnificent and they think that almost nobody is good enough for them. And they're lovely people, many of them, but they have fairly high sort of impressions of themselves, and then if there's no spark with this other person, they're not going to go on a second date because this person doesn't turn me on, and it's obviously not glorious enough and not good enough for me. Okay, so you see it in almost every walk of life. You see it on Judge Judy, where these people always are right. They're liars, they're cheats, they're scamsters, and yet they're right. They, in their own eyes, they're just so right. So what's this got to do with the glory of God? Now, the glory of God, it says in, I think it's Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork. So if you want to see the glory of God, just go and look at the night sky, and then go and look through Hubble telescope and then James Webb and just look at the glorious universe. Or go and look through an electron microscope at the tiniest things, how marvelously made they are. Even at the smallest level, things are still marvelously made. So go and look at the fossil record, you'll see the glory of God. But I want to talk about a completely different aspect of the glory of God. You know how Moses asked to see God's glory and God put him in a cave and his glory passed by? Or when Elijah was in a cave and God came as a whirlwind and fire and an earthquake and a tornado, I think it was, and yet God was in the still small voice. God's glory can be manifest in many different ways. And there's one aspect of the glory of God that just so impresses me. It just so impresses me. I'm sure you've never heard this aspect of the glory of God before. The glory of God, and it's going to take a while for me to explain this, but let's try it this way. That God, who is so great, who made the whole universe, created everything, this beautiful, lovely, well-balanced universe where all the constants are just perfect. Everything's so perfect, because if it wasn't, there'd be no life on Earth. And we're the Goldilocks planet, so everything's just perfectly balanced so that life can exist in such a marvelous and beautiful form. And life is good. But think about how unknown God is. Can you find God on this planet? Look at this great and glorious creator of the whole universe, and yet he's so hard to see. He's invisible. He doesn't live in a great temple like all Zeus and Apollo and Jupiter, and they've got big temples, big statues, big marvelous ways of worshipping. Oh, this is the way these demon gods love to be worshipped. They just love to have be the center of attention in a big fat golden carved palace. And yet the true God. He did have a temple that Herod built, that Christ came to, and yet that temple was being abused. It was full of money lenders and money changers and pigeons and noise, and it was like a market, and Christ had to make a whip and chase all these people out so he could preach in his Father's house. So God does have a temple, or did have a temple at times, but very seldom, and it was only used appropriately for a very few times by Christ. So you could say for the rest, God's temple was was not used correctly. And there was a time when there were some sacrifices in this temple, but Christ came, and when Christ came, the temple was destroyed by Titus in 69, 70 AD, and there's been no temple since. And yeah, Christ was the ultimate sacrifice, so what would be the point of a temple and sacrificing animals? Because the sacrifice of animals was supposed to point to the sacrifice of Christ. So let's go back to the glory of God. This great and glorious God comes to earth. He walks with Adam. Adam rejects him. Now this is God writing his own book. He's talking about how Adam rejected him. Adam and Eve rejected him. Then Cain kind of got jealous, killed Abel, and got thrown out of the Garden of Eden. So God was unknown now for 1,400 years till there's a flood. All seems to have gone pear-shaped. This is God telling of his glorious works. No one in the earth is worshipping God, so he brings a worldwide flood. It's all become messed up. And then he goes to some Abram, who's living in Ur of the Chaldees. He says, go to a piece of the Middle East, a piece of, well, fairly fertile land in those days. I'll give it to you. And God starts to work with Abram, and Abram kind of cooperates, and God comes to Abram in the form of a man and two other angels when he talks to him as he's about to go off and destroy Lot. So God comes as a lowly human being, talks to Abram, tells him he'll have a son, etc. Has Isaac. As far as I know, the only time God really interacts with Isaac is, Isaac's about to be sacrificed. He's a teenager. He's on this altar, and God shouts out, Abram, don't kill him. There's a ram, you can sacrifice him rather. So Isaac has a rather limited interaction with God, and then Jacob wrestles with God, who later became Jesus, and he wrestles with him. So God comes to Jacob in the form of a man. And then Joseph has a limited interaction. And then the Israelites go into slavery. This is God's favorite people. They go into slavery for 400 years and they come out of slavery. Then God destroys them in the wilderness. Then a generation goes into the land of Canaan and they become unfaithful. And so they become enslaved by the locals. And this goes on. And then they get tired of the prophets of God. So they demand a king. God gives them a king. And then the kings all go horribly wrong. The kingdom splits into two. And of all the kings of Judah, half are probably rubbish and the other half are okay. But of all the kings of Israel, not one is good. And then finally, we end up in 0 BC, or Christ's time, and the Romans are ruling the sort of over God's people, the Israelites, and they reject Christ. I mean, this Bible is a whole record of rejection of God. All through the Old Testament is just a complete rejection of God. This is the great and glorious God who's telling how he's just continually rejected by his people. So God then goes to the world, to the Gentiles. His own people don't want him, so he goes to the Gentiles and they start coming in droves. But God still remains hidden. I mean, they're worshipping, as Paul talked about, the unknown God, when he was talking on Mars Hill to, who was it, the Athenians or whatever, and they had a statue to a memorial to the unknown God. God is unknown. He's remained unknown. Look at Jesus Christ. Born of a virgin, so he's considered illegitimate, in a little town of Bethlehem, nothing, nowhere, of plain folks. The only people who worship him are shepherds, who are the lowliest of the low, and some people from the Far East, the three kings or the wise men, or whatever you want to call them, the magi, who come and worship him, then they're gone. Then Christ just lives for 30 years. He's got no childhood friends. His family rejects him. His sisters don't want to seem to see him. His brothers, James and Jude, eventually become converted, but at the time of Christ, when he was alive, they had rejected him. So Christ's got his mom and his brothers. He lives in the house with them. He's unknown. This, the great God of the universe, who came as a man, looks so ordinary, acts so ordinary, is almost introverted, is almost shy, has made zero impression on the inhabitants of the village of Nazareth, where he grew up, and Capernaum rejects him, where he lives. They just see nothing in him. The scribes and Pharisees, who are supposed to be the ones who know better, they reject him. They say, this guy just looks so wrong. I mean, and the reason they reject him is because he's a threat to their power. And they find the excuse that he heals on the Sabbath to reject him, and then they put him to death in the most cruel and harsh way, which is the crucifixion. This is the glorious God who created everything, from the atom to the largest universe, to all humans, to all life, to everything in the fossil record, which is, there's 100 times more animals and plants that have ever lived than you see around you today in the fossil record. Magnificent things that God has done, and yet God is still unknown. He comes before Pilate. He looks like nothing. He goes before Herod. Herod just laughs at him, rejects him. Pilate rejects him. The scribes and Pharisees have rejected him. His own people have rejected him. He's crucified. He's killed. And the only thing that he's got going for him is he rises from the dead. He doesn't go and say, look at me, everybody. I've risen from the dead. I am God. No, he appears to a few of his disciples, and then he disappears for 2,000 years till his return. This is God. This is the most amazing, glorious thing about God. How even his own storybook, the Bible, tells of his utter rejection, his hiddenness. You can't find him. You can't see God anywhere. This is the magnificent God who created everything. Unlike, say, Lucifer, who wanted to be like the Most High, wanted to be worshipped, wanted his name in sign writing in the sky. He would have had temples to himself. He wants to rule the world like great emperors do. I mean, look at these human emperors, these people who conquer nations, and they glorious Charlemagne and Genghis Khan and Hitler and Alexander the Great, and all these how we love to be those world-changing, world-ruling emperors. And yet Christ, who is the true God, the ruler, the one with all power, all glory, he comes as a man who has it says he has no comeliness that we should desire him. He looks so ordinary that it takes Judas to kiss him to reveal who he is. He doesn't come as the most handsome as he could have. God could have come, I'm sure, in any form, but he comes as the most ordinary person. Comes with so ordinary that he's hard to identify in a crowd, and he can travel incognito to the feast in Jerusalem. Nobody recognizes him because he's just so ordinary looking. And even after he's been raised from the dead, a few people see him, his disciples, and then he goes to heaven and he sits at the right hand of the Father, and the Father's going to make him the ruler. And what I find so interesting is how he calls himself. He doesn't even talk about himself, I'm the great God, I'm the great I am. He says this. He calls himself the Son of Man. I think it's used over 80 times in the New Testament. He just calls himself in the third person. He talks about himself in the third person. He doesn't say, I did this and I created the world. All these parables are told in a third person kind of way. A sower went forth to sow, and some of the seed fell on this ground. He doesn't say, I am sowing for the kingdom. He says a sower. He's so humble. He doesn't even use himself in the first person or whatever. He's talking about someone in the third person, an object, a man who went to sow. But he's talking about himself. And all the parables, that's why Christ talked in parables. He's so humble that he doesn't even say, I did this and I did that and I do the other. He always talks about A woman hides some yeast in a lump. That woman is himself. He is hiding yeast in a lump. The lump is the world. The yeast is his kingdom and his people spreading the gospel throughout the world. It's all done in such a humble way that Christ talked in parables. He doesn't, as Isaiah says, he shall not shout from the corner tops or the rooftops. My servant shall not exalt himself and shout aloud in the street. Something like that Isaiah talks about Christ, and how a broken reed will not break, and a smoking flax he shall not put out. He is so humble that he didn't come to judge the world. He didn't come to, the only people he judges are the people who reject him and want to argue with him. Then he does judge them who, by their own words, are condemning themselves. And he says, your words are condemning you. You're judging yourself here. To the scribes and Pharisees who rejected him, he said, whoa, whoa, whoa. So Christ is so humble that he doesn't argue with people, doesn't go around trying to persuade people. He just goes around quietly, healing, preaching, starting a kingdom. Anytime he confronts people is when they confront him. And it's such a humble thing. And then eventually God the Father, through the book of Revelation, reveals the glory of Christ. Christ's glory is hidden. He calls himself the Son of Man, a reference to Daniel 7 verse 13 and 14, where he talks about the Son of Man shall inherit a kingdom and honor and dominion and glory. And so Christ is referring to that chapter in Daniel 7 verse 13, 14, where Daniel talked about a Son of Man who would be given a kingdom by the Most High. The Most High, which is his Father, is going to glorify him. Christ's going to come in the clouds of heaven, and like the lightning shining from the east to the west. But until then, the glory of God is so hidden. You don't see the glory of God in everyday life. God is so hidden that people like Dawkins and all these famous evolutionists just reject God. They can say, yes, this all came about by chance, Chance is amazing. Everything here, all this beauty, all the millions of enzymes that go working together to keep a human alive. Well, it's all chance. Not a chance that it's a chance. Because if any one of those thousands and millions of enzymes goes wrong, the person just dies there on the spot. So the chance that you can get all those enzymes in a human body all assembled together and working together in the correct body by pure chance is just ridiculous. So these guys, these atheists and people who reject God, are as dumb as people who believe that an elephant holds up the earth. Stupid ideas which you laugh at, but people believe. Or like Atlas holds up, or whatever stupid belief that people can have. These evolutionists are just as dumb. So they think that they glory in their intellect. Oh, I'm so bright, I'm so brilliant, I've just figured this all out. In fact, no, you figured nothing out. You just believe in pure chance. You roll that dice often enough and all this can just happen by chance. Yeah, that's really, really super dumb. But anyway, so the glory of God and the glory of Jesus Christ just remains throughout the whole Bible. God is hidden. He appears to people in the desert, in a bush, in the boondocks, on a mountain, Mount Sinai, in the middle of a desert. He appears to Abram as a wandering person, a traveler, a human being. He appears to Elijah as a fire in a cave. Nobody sees, apart from these few people, ever see the glory of God or see God or experience anything of his glory. And God just remains the unknown God. And it's amazing. Satan would be broadcasting, as I say, his name and himself if he could. He'd have the aurora borealis say, Lucifer the Great. Those things wouldn't just... Those colors in the sky would be proclaiming his greatness if he had a chance to create. He'd have, hand-carved mountains that look like him. He'd have the moon with his face on it. He'd do everything possible to exalt himself, just as humans would do. So when you see the glory of humans and all the things, the glory of this world, And then you look at God and you see true glory, the humility, the utter humility of God, who has remained hidden, remained rejected, accepted rejection, and he's slowly building up a kingdom of believers, Christ and his disciples and his followers, who are going to eventually show themselves at Christ's second coming, start a kingdom, and that kingdom will, over 1,000 years, spread to fill the earth. I don't think it's going to be an easy thing. The nations that are left, even in that devastated mass extinction, the few people that are left are still going to want to reject God. Even though Satan's been banished for 1,000 years, and they have no excuse because they've been deceived by Satan. People are not attracted to the humility that God is. God is humble. God is so low-key, invisible. I mean, Christ in his time was not worshipped except almost none on a few occasions. The demons knew that he was the Son of God, and he told them to shut up and don't say so. His disciples on occasion would say, "Oh, you the Messiah, you the Son of God." And he'd say, "Yes, flesh and blood hasn't revealed that to you, the Father has." Now, he didn't say, "Go and tell everybody that he is the Son of God." So Christ kept it all so under wraps and low key. This is such a glorious thing, the humility of God. It just blows my mind how we who are nothing want to exalt ourselves, do everything possible to look good, be rich, be famous, be noticed, have our name in lights, etc., be the winner, be the greatest. And yet the one who is the greatest, who is the winner, whose name should be in lights, you see nowhere. That is the glory of God. That is the thing that I am so impressed with. And that when Christ returns, only then will we see his glory, because the Father will insist that he be seen and his glory, and he will come with the angels with great heavenly signs to a devastated world, and will remake the world and establish his kingdom, and people will slowly flow into it, but it's going to be a struggle. He's going to need all the help he can get from all the converted people who are now spirit beings to rule over the nations, and there's going to be resistance, there's going to be trouble, and he's going to withhold rain from the Gentile nations that refuse to come and worship him, because even in the millennium, people are going to say, "But this God is so low-key, he's so shy and quiet and reserved and unpushy," and they're going to, people will go and follow a Hitler, a Napoleon, a big-mouthed, loud-mouthed, the son of perdition in the end time is going to be a big, fat, loud-mouthed, big mouth, let's have the marching bands, let's talk glory, let's talk victory, let's talk death, let's talk killing, let's talk capturing the world. And people are so attracted to that. And when you come humble and quiet and meek and low-key like Christ is, people just don't see that is true glory. Christ is going to rule his kingdom in a low key, but that is the glory of God. God doesn't have to push himself. God knows his glory. God is glorious. He's the only thing that's glory. God will not share his glory with anyone. When these preachers and pastors and everybody want to talk about how great, yes, and I'll just stretch out my hand and heal, and you'll be blessed, and this and that, and they've got no power, they've got no glory. Only God has glory, and he will not share that glory with anyone. And God the Father will share his glory with Christ, but no one's going to take away from the glory of God, which is the true glory, the true power. He only has true power, the power of life and death. He alone will decide who he will raise from the dead and who will enter his kingdom. Now that is true power, that is true glory. God owns everything. He can give it to anybody at any time. And yet, we're so striving after everything. We so wanted the things that God already has to give. And he's not going to give it to us now. Because he doesn't want us to be like this world that wants everything now. I want it all and I want it now. I want the glory, I want the honor, I want the fame, I want the recognition, I want to be in headlights, I want to be most popular, I want to be famous, please, Lord. No, that's not the way Christ operates. It's It's not the way his people operate. It's not the way his kingdom operates. It's going to be a low. God's kingdom, I can see the personality of Christ stamped on that kingdom. It's going to be low key. It's going to expand. It's going to be kind. It's going to be gentle. But it's going to be powerful. It's the true power. God has all power. He's a power to do everything. And this is all this big fake glory which this world has. The buildings, the science, the manners, the arts, the this, the that, the other. All the things that are considered glorious are just going to fade away. And the true glory will remain in the humble King of Kings, which is Christ.